Thank you, Mickey. I think we can start.
Yes.
So good morning, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is really a great honor to be the one to moderate this gracious closing session for this wonderful conference, those of us who've been around for the days. And I'll start by saying that these last few days, we have witnessed a convergence of great minds here. Policymakers, academicians, researchers, practitioners, county governments and communities, development partners and state, non-state actors. And when you look at restoration agenda, it is a concerted agenda and everyone needs to be on board. Looking through the objectives and having listened to a few, maybe a number of the sessions, it can only be said that this is a job that has been well done. However, the conference just marks the beginning of a journey to reclaim the ecosystem. In pursuance of the UN vision in the decade of ecological restoration, I take this very early opportunity to invite everybody and to welcome everybody to this session and further welcome you to a renewed start towards a sustained landscape restoration. We have a clarion call that has run us through this whole conference, a call to accelerate the momentum of land restoration in Kenya by bringing together and linking multiple dimensions of efforts. And therefore, without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite Nikki to take us through the themes presentations in terms of looking at the recommendations and the action plans therein. Mickey?
Thank you so much, Lucy, and it is wonderful to have you moderating this closing session. So as you just mentioned, my name is Mika Bourne Ochieng. I am the Program Manager for Regreening Africa at C4ICRAF in Nairobi. And I just wanted to take a moment before I introduce the different thematic sessions, just to thank everybody that has participated in this conference, everybody that has helped to organize a session, everybody that's supported logistically for IT, the speakers, the participants. It's been a hugely successful conference with great participation, great ideas, and a lot of clear ways forward. So I'm very excited to have us now go into a report back from each of the thematic sessions. Just quickly, before we go to the thematic sessions, the conference objectives, just to remind ourselves what we set out to do. And as we hear from each of the themes, I think we can all agree that we are on a road to achieving many of these. So without much further ado, I would now like to introduce Jonathan Muriuki to run us through the first theme session, Approaches and Practices for Restoration. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mika. Guests, ladies and gentlemen, we want to welcome you to this again. This was a very lovely session between 9 o'clock and 1 o'clock on Monday, where we discussed quite a number of things about some of the projects being going on in terms of the approaches for restoration, focusing on 4 key ecosystems, actually 3 ecosystems and 1 approach, which were the forest landscapes, agricultural landscapes, and also the rangelands, which really constitute how our country is formed at the moment. But we also chose to bring in the conservation space because these are old area where we are integrating biodiversity conservation, and that serves a lot when restoration does not happen, and therefore we underhold the thematic session on that. So I'll take you through the 4 thematic sessions. Just a summary of the action points that came out of that, because we have a huge report of what happened during those 4 hours that cannot fit in within 5 minutes. So Mika, let's go to the next slide and discuss the agricultural landscapes. Sorry, the pastoral landscape. So this brought in quite a number of actors in the space, because you know that this takes almost 83% of our land. And therefore we had quite a number of actors coming from government, coming from non-state actors, and some of them including the private sector. And we saw a lot of challenges that come in there, challenges to do with land tenure, challenges to do with the fact that there's free roaming livestock, but of course a few others like invasive species, prosopis, and others like acacias that are making it really difficult for communities within there to grow livelihoods. But then there has been a lot of work going on, led by county governments and non-state actors and the national government, including NDMA, that we saw can be built on already. And so what needs to be done in that space is to ensure there is coordination of all agencies that are involved in restoration so far for us to be able to do stock taking, and the government can lead on that. It's also important to do land use planning, especially the county spatial plans, because as I said before, this area also has got biodiversity conservation. So we encourage the county governments to lead the work on spatial planning and then design specific capacity building approaches to internalize the unique nature of pastures and ledgelands. So we add a lot of emphasis on tree planting, assisted natural regeneration, holistic grazing management, and this need to start working on specific capacity building approaches to ensure that these things can go into scale, while ensuring that we are also integrating indigenous knowledge with scientific knowledge and use this one for evidence in decision making that the counties can use. Monitoring has been a big challenge because various projects have got their own monitoring processes, and there is going to harmonize these ones, as well as do joint planning and resource mobilization. We feel that academia can also lead in terms of developing specific curriculum for the many universities that are now focusing on this space, so that we can also train the capacity for doing this work tomorrow. Stakeholder mapping and enhanced joint planning, again, was very much emphasized, and we believe that the county governments plus other stakeholders can lead in this. And I think during this ecosystem on decade on ecosystem restoration, we need to make sure that this at least begins to happen now. Next slide, Mika. So the next landscape is a forest landscape. Again, a lot of activity that is going in there based on work, especially in the water towers, but also in other small spaces within the forest, including private forests. And one of the things that we thought that is very important to be done is to ensure that there is benefit sharing regulation and the development by Carefree, KFS, and NACOVA to ensure that the communities are incentivized to do restoration of forest landscapes, because then they bear most of the burden, but also start to benefit from most of these activity. We felt also there is quite a lot of space that can be gained from adding infrastructure development projects, also engaging in planting of trees. We know some of these roads that have been constructed, and we've lost a lot of trees that were in there. So we feel this is something that needs to be done to be included. And this is something that government can lead. Sorry, we do not have a leader there. But also the work with faith communities. And we've seen this in many countries where religious communities are helping with a lot of forest landscape restoration and various spaces of Kenya. We have seen that as well. So we feel we need to bring these ones and bring the faith-led community. I think we'll be having a speaker today also showing some of the work that they are doing. So it is good for Kenya Forest Service, but other partners in this landscape to work with the faith-based community so that we can also use the influence that they have on their followers to develop awareness. So Carefree has an app that is helping, and quite a number of apps have also been developed. And this was also done in the session of yesterday, that is being used for restoration. But then again, many people did not know about this. So it is about harmonizing these apps to ensure that they can be used across board. And then we can use this now for the national stock taking. Carefree has also learned some work on aerial seeding. We'd like to see what success rates are and see if this as an approach can be used for the various areas that are yet to be restored within the forest landscapes. We think this is an approach that needs to be scaled. So Carefree will be leading on this and bringing also KFS, ensuring that they work together with the countries to bring countries to roll out restoration and also to cascade the targets that have been set at the national level. So we would like to ensure that Carefree and KFS promote restoration technologies, which then can go into communities and create awareness on what exists that communities can use at low cost. Next, Mika. The agricultural landscapes, a lot of conversation was held here, and I would like to mention that we saw a lot of success work done by such organizations as Meta, World Vision, Via Agroforestry. We also had Zero to Heroes, we had other activities, reports, very good reports coming from economics of land degradation, showing some of the successes and what are the costs and what are the benefits that come out of that. Some work including getting rainwater harvesting and bring them into use in the agricultural landscapes. Some work on carbon that via agroforestry has spearheaded. Quite a lot of successes that have been seen in these projects, but we see a big need to do capacity building for communities to utilize this, and also to ensure partnership and collaborations among various departments so that we can be able to scale successful projects and strengthen local governance. So we think Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives has a lot of work to do this in terms of leading the collaboration that need to happen. And because they are developing the Kenya agroforestry strategy right now, we felt that they need to have this already brought into ratification, and therefore they can now be able to lead the partners into this, because there's a lot of work that is already being seen that can bring success into agricultural landscapes. But then there's still very little that partners know among each other. So that is a space that we need to strengthen, and the ministry has a big role in doing that. Mika, conservation, please. And the last of this, not the least, is the whole conversation around how we do restoration around conservation spaces and ensure that we are prioritizing biodiversity conservation within this conversation on restoration. So one of the things we've thought is that Kenya Forest Service can lead creation of communication networks amongst stakeholders in restoration efforts, whether this is conservation in forest landscapes or in rangelands or even in agricultural landscapes and wetlands, and also coordinate restoration CSR activities at national and county levels, because we are seeing there's quite a number of CSR activities that have been done for conservation. Some of these came up yesterday in the private sector engagement session, and they're going to be reported shortly. So we need to have this coordination happening so that we can gain the spaces around there. And we thought this can be led by the Ministry of Environment together with the Council of Governors. Also providing a framework for cascading issues that Wildlife Clubs of Kenya is doing in schools on plastics to other institutions of learning, because this was seen to be a very successful initiative among other initiatives that Wildlife Clubs of Kenya are doing, but doesn't seem to be known by partners. So the Minister of Environment to ensure that this framework is in there and other partners can plug into it. But above all, to consider a holistic approach to restoration by revising goals, objectives, and work plans so that they can internalize the whole area of biodiversity conservation. And this is a responsibility for all restoration stakeholders. Thank you, Mika. That's the brief summary, but we'll be providing a report for all this that will come into the website and also be available to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And what a rich thematic session and so much vibrant discussion, and there'll be a lot to continue forward. So thank you for that presentation. And I'd just like to remind participants that you can put questions into the Q&A and people can vote those questions up. So when we have some time to reflect back on questions, we'll either respond in the chat or come to some questions, but please actively use the Q&A and the chat for any comments. Now I'm delighted to invite Kipto Chemoiwo to present on the youth and women inclusion in restoration. And Kipto, if it's okay, I'll share my screen. You just tell me when to move forward.
Okay, thanks, Mika. So I'm Kipto Chemoiwo, just as Mika has mentioned. I'm from JLFX Nairobi. And so on Tuesday, we had this session on youth and women inclusion in restoration. And why we were having this session was to provide recommendations on how women and youth can be meaningfully engaged in restoration. And so also in the session, we had specific objectives that we wanted to get into during the session. And one was to discuss ways in which women and youth can be meaningfully engaged in the decision-making processes as far as restoration is concerned. And also another thing that we wanted to achieve was to highlight some of the challenges or the bottlenecks that youth and women face when they're engaging in restoration, and also to come up with solutions that could help in the same. And the last objective that we had was to showcase the opportunities that youth and women in restoration are, including linkages to sources of finances, capacity building, and networking opportunities just for knowledge sharing among the youth and women. So Amika, next slide. Thank you. And so Just before that slide, Mika, are there any action plans, or I do the recommendations first?
I think start with the recommendations if that's
Oh,
okay.
okay, Mika, thanks. And so these are some of the recommendations that came out during the session, and one was change in mindsets, and that is both at the community level on women leadership, because we were realizing that there are a lot of, especially cultural barriers that that hinder women, especially when they are undertaking restoration. And so the change in mindset in the community was going to be a plus for the women engaging in restoration, and also for the youth in as far as taking their role in restoration is concerned. And that could be this could be done especially through the sensitization of men, women, and also youth by NGOs and other actors. And also another recommendation was county governments promoting the participation of women and youth in decision-making policies by putting in place the policies supporting their participation and advertising the communication in publicly, because those who are presenting during the session were saying that during the budgetary processes, they're always not collaborated. And so now if the county government during that part of allocating the budgets, if they get to engage the youth and women, it will be a plus when they get to bring the agenda of restoration onto the table. And also the county governments should also empower them to understand the planning processes and policy documents such as the CIDPS. And also the government agencies, researchers, and NGOs need to support the grassroots communication of restoration targets and plans clearly. Because there was a presentation that was telling us that we are telling people at the grassroots levels that we need a 10% tree cover, but you're not telling them why. Why should I have a 10% tree cover in my farm? Another recommendation was incentives for promoting women and youth in restoration, which included, among others, introduction of alternative livelihoods that they can engage in when they're engaging in restoration. And this included agribusinesses, ecotourism, fish farming, and also beekeeping. Another one was equal benefit sharing mechanisms. This could be especially in terms of using forests. And also another incentive was criteria adjustment by donor for grants, because they were saying that when they're applying for these things through the proposals, that process is always very hectic. And so that if adjustments are made in that, it will be a plus for the youth and women in restoration. And also banks and loans need to adjust their criteria to suit women and youth. Like, how can you access funding? Are there any places that you can adjust just to make sure that they also get favored? And also improving land tenure security rights, that's access to ownership by both women and youth. Next slide, Mika. Some more recommendations: youth and women should organize themselves into groups, because there was this thing that arose that when you're in groups, you're more organized to get funds and also to get other things and also to network. When you're in a group, it's better for you to get the networking from other networks. And also a vibrant network for young people and women. Just once you form a group, now you look for networking avenues. And this way you will get experience, and also you will get to share opportunities, and also just to create that advocacy for restoration agenda at decision-making levels. Also, women and youth should be intentional in networking and joining the existing networks. Like, you have to go out, you have to push yourself to get these things. Another thing was capacity building avenues that can be taken advantage of, which included online resources that the youth were encouraging themselves, that we were encouraging ourselves, that we need to take advantage of these things. And also we need to document the youth and women restoration success stories. And finally, youth and women should capitalize on social media to showcase their work and also increase the visibility and attract funding. Next slide, Mika. And so the action plans last. So there was this thing that we need support for the youth in terms of network. And so Regreening Africa was supporting this, like they're ready to create that network to support the youth who are engaging in restoration, also GLFX Nairobi, and also any other actors who may be here interested to support that youth network, because there are some that are existing. So we need that support going forward. And also another action plan moving forward is capturing success stories of restoration initiatives by women and youth, which Regreening Africa also said they could contribute to. And lastly, training on fundraising strategies, grant management, and proposal or grant writing. And this also Regreening Africa championed, and also GLFX Nairobi. And also there's the Kenya Environmental Awareness Network that also supports this. And so if there's any other actor among this platform that could actually want to engage in these actions to support the youth and women in restoration, you're more than welcome. So thank you so much. Let's continue regaining our minds and our planet. Thank you, Mika.
Thank you so much, Kiptor. And as you've just mentioned, please feel free to add in the chat, in the Q&A, if you would like to contribute, if you would like to be involved in these actions. It's a very open space. Feel free to contribute to the recommendations, to the actions, and to engage further. So please continue to use the chat and Q&A, and I would like to invite Laura Mukwana, who was the overall moderator as well as the organizers for the sessions, to present on movement building and leveraging. Laura, over to you, please.
Thank you, Mika. So the objective of the movement building and leveraging session was to promote the understanding for the need for strong grassroots movement for landscape restoration. We also wanted to promote that understanding of the roles that these grassroots organizations or organizations with grassroots reach have in forest and landscape restoration. And then lastly, wanted to explore synergies between the various grassroots organizations, wanted to see how they can work together to scale up restoration at that level. So we basically had 3 sessions within this overall session. We had a session on the role of faith-based communities in the management and restoration of land in Kenya. We had a role on grassroots and county governments. So one of the recommendations, in terms of recommendations, we had recommendations for promoting the participation of faith communities. So it came out clearly that development partners, government agencies, county governments, NGOs, researchers, and other actors, any other actors involved in the restoration arena, needs to include needs to include these faith communities in landscape restoration. The reason being, they have huge influence over their congregants. You know, if we can quote the words of the Reverend and the African anthropologist, Reverend John Beatty, who said, Africans are notoriously religious and religion permeates into all aspects of their lives. So religion has a big influence over the lives of Africans. So that is an avenue. And another example of the influence of religion on our lives is the fact that recently, I don't know how recently that was, but the Pope's letter on caring for a common earth, that has prompted a lot of action in the Catholic community towards landscape restoration and environmental conservation. So moving forward, we need to view faith communities as partners, because they have the avenues, they have the ways of communicating, they can mobilize their members and their congregants towards landscape restoration. So the other thing is that they also have the structures. They have the programs, like the youth programs, they have the children's programs, women programs, they have structures such as schools, hospitals, and other institutions that can be leveraged upon. So the other thing that came out clearly is that we need to include them in platforms. They've been excluded from platforms where discussions happening about landscape restoration and environmental conservation or development are taking place. So we need to include them, and we need to include all faith communities. That's Christians, Muslims, every other faith community. Then we need to communicate and package this message of restoration in a way that can be easily understood by them, but that's by their leaders and their members. Then we need to target them and help them to see their role in environmental stewardship. We need to help them advise them on how best they can integrate this message and this learning into their structures, and also empower them with the technical capacity that they need. Next slide, please. So with regards to the grassroots organization, so it came out clearly that development partners and engaging continuous capacity building in landscape restoration for in terms of approaches, techniques for communities. That is really key. They need to support the many existing grassroots approaches that are taking place. The models, like be it the Community Forest Association, the value chains, local community groups, they need to support the activities on the ground. Then there's also that need to monitor. And, there's that aspect of moving from tree planting to tree growing. So for tree growing to happen, we need to monitor what's happening. What is the survival rate? What are the challenges? What needs to be done? So we also need to ensure that there's a greater focus at the local level. A lot of the times projects are planned at higher levels, and then less is being done on the ground. Then ensuring that whole aspect of availability of funds at the right time. So it emerged that sometimes in regards to donor funding, there are some delays that happen in the release of the funds. So it would be good for donors to program themselves, or development partners to program themselves, the release of the funding in line with the activities. Then also, we need to give incentives to communities to engage in restoration, because it emerged that poverty is a huge challenge that makes people who become over-reliant on natural resources. So we need to introduce alternative sources of incomes, such as sustainable agricultural product value chains and the rest. Next slide, please. So in regards to county governments, it came out clearly that county governments are already doing quite a lot in regards to restoration. They've already mainstreamed restoration into their county integrated development plans, but a lot more needs to be done. They need to take it a step further. They need to integrate them into the ward development plans. They need to integrate them into the county annual development plans. They need to mainstream restoration into all sectors and sectoral plans, and also allocate the necessary budget for them, because it's emerged that the budget towards restoration is not enough. The other thing is that they need to develop and implement policy and legal frameworks that specifically target restoration at community level. That means probably creating a restoration fund, which is similar to the climate change fund, and also ensuring ownership and management, policies around land tenure and tree tenure. Then promoting public participation in the planning, designing, and implementation of restoration activities. So I think I can also refer back to what Kipto was talking about, the fact that women and youth feel that they're not included in these processes. So we need to have a strong aspect on public participation in the planning, the development of these projects, in the budgeting. We can involve the community. They can involve the communities in mapping and prioritizing restoration needs, incorporating various methodologies. They need to formulate public participation policies to enhance these kind of processes. Then they also need to allocate more funds to restoration activities, and also ensuring that all restoration approaches and practices are promoted, not just focusing, a lot of restoration activities are focused on tree planting. No, we need to adapt other conditions based on the context, whether it's for farmer managed natural regeneration, whether it's sustainable, like the value chains, maybe agroforestry using fruit trees. We need to adopt, we need to be flexible. They need to be flexible, not only funding tree planting. So in terms of actions, there's going to be a networking session for faith communities, which is being led by AECO Diplomatique and Evergreening Alliance, and the exact dates will be communicated soon after. And then also bringing out the county government, they're having a devolution conference, which is happening very soon. So this whole aspect of landscape restoration needs to come out very clearly. They need to promote the learning across the countries as well. That's the Council of Governors and the partners. Then also lastly, document. We're going to document and support grassroots mobilization approaches and provide capacity building and connect. So there's that need to continuously document what's happening on the ground. We need to continuously provide capacity building and connect the people, what these actors were acting on the ground to projects. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that very comprehensive summary of 3 sessions within the theme. And please continue to use the chat and Q&A to add your comments and suggestions to this feedback. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Peter Ndunda to give the summary from the Landscape Restoration Monitoring thematic session. Peter, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mika, and good morning, participants. My name is Peter Ndunda. I am a senior associate with World Resources Institute, WRI. Today, I'm representing the National Monitoring Conference that was held yesterday. The monitoring conference was building on the outcomes of the pre-conference webinar that we had a couple of weeks ago. We had over 150 participants representing a wide range of spectrum from the forest sector, agriculture sector, rangeland sector, and the water sector in the conference yesterday. The objective of the monitoring conference was to provide a platform for forest and landscape restoration stakeholders to share the existing approaches, the tools, the methods that they are using to monitor and report forest and landscape restoration implementation. The second objective was to discuss the creation of a national working group on monitoring forest and landscape restoration. Next slide, please. The conference participants noted that there are many ongoing efforts in this country. They specifically noted that there is an ongoing effort to conclude the development of a Forest and Landscape Restoration Action Plan, the FOLAREP, which is led by the Kenya Forest Service. This action plan provides many opportunities for coordinated forest and landscape restoration implementation, as well as coordination of the monitoring efforts in this country. Speaker after speaker shared their institutional experiences in forest and landscape restoration monitoring from either a project perspective or a program perspective or a sector perspective. All their presentations demonstrated to us and agreed on about 5 key things. Number 1, Kenya has amazing, successful forest and landscape restoration implementation activities on the ground. Number 2, Kenya has many successful forest and landscape restoration monitoring efforts in the country. All of them are being implemented at either institutional level or at project level or at program level. It was therefore concluded, number 3, that we have all the experiences, we have the lessons, we have the tools, we have the skills that are required to monitor and track forest and landscape restoration implementation in this country. Number 4. However, it was also noted that we need coordination between the various monitoring approaches, the various systems, the various platforms that are currently being used. And without this coordination mechanism, as a country, we are not able to know or report our national status of forest and landscape restoration progress in a credible and consistent manner over time. And therefore, the conference participants recommended that we establish an integrated national monitoring and reporting framework to address this gap. Next slide, please. As a way forward, the conference participants proposed the establishment of a national forest and landscape restoration monitoring working group to lead the development of the integrated national monitoring and reporting framework for forest and landscape restoration, building on our collective experiences and lessons that we have learned from the various stakeholders. A list of initial members of the working group was proposed. This is not a conclusive list, but it has been proposed for consideration by the government leadership. And we will continue to progressively add other members as necessary and as needed. Next slide, please. The proposed key tasks of the working group is to, number 1, identify and propose relevant indicators for monitoring and reporting at the national level. And number 2 is to propose this national framework or a process for a coordinated monitoring and reporting and also learning for this forest and landscape restoration at the national level. Next slide, please. It was also proposed that the working group would be formulated within the next 2 months and complete this exercise by May next year. Next slide, please. The proposed next step from this conference would be to establish this national working group and seek feedback on their roles, their mandate, and the terms of reference that would guide this national working group. Thank you very much, and back to you, Mika.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I can see information coming through the chat and Q&A. So please continue to add in there if there's any feedback on the presentations that you've received. Thank you so much, Peter. And now this is the last thematic feedback, and this took place yesterday evening. So really an incredible job to have this quick turnaround from both these sessions to share the key outcomes. So I'd like to welcome Linda Muñao to present on the entrepreneurship and business approaches in restoration. Linda, over to you, please.
Much, Mika, for the opportunity. My name is Linda Muñao. I'm the president or chairperson of the Environment Institute of Kenya, which is a professional association for all environmental practitioners in our country. I'm also immediate former vice chairperson of Environment and Natural Resources Sector Board of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. So yesterday we had a really good session on entrepreneurship and business approaches in restoration. And the objectives of our session was to bring together private sector to climate action and climate finance by showing what's possible. So we had various private sector actors sharing lessons learned, as well as showcasing the opportunities and what they're doing to support landscape restoration. We're also there to identify opportunities, challenges, bottlenecks that businesses face and in private sector, when undertaking restoration work. So there's different kinds of challenges, including, livestock, as I think has been mentioned by one of our earlier presenters, chemical usage, there's rules and regulations, some policies that are also bringing challenges. Also wanted to have a platform facilitated for private sector actors to come together, to be able to interact and network and, synergize on the various things that they are doing, and, be able to move restoration work forward together. And also it was a good opportunity for various private sector actors to bring forward what they're doing for, more visibility, to be able to just to showcase what they're doing. So we had breakout rooms as well. So we had a main session and then we had various breakout rooms. And in those sessions, we had one session having private sector engagement in landscape restoration. So we had a couple of private sector actors like Safaricom and others who are explaining what kind of work they're engaged in restoration. We also had direct private sector engagement in landscape restoration. So again, we also had another group that was going through some of the landscape restoration activities, especially in arid and semi-arid areas. And the third one was plugging into climate action and associated opportunities. So we had a group also and participants going into discussions on climate change action being undertaken on the ground. Next slide, please. So out of all the, the main session and the breakout sessions that we had, there were various recommendations that came through from the participants. And one was that government needs to review some legislations that make it challenging for private sector to meaningfully engage in restoration. So there's a couple of those on chemical usage, on tree cutting and afforestation and reforestation, on installation of dams. Some of these legislations or policies that have been put in place sometimes are intended to address some challenges, but in the end, they make it difficult for private sector actors to engage in restoration activities. Also, we felt that it was good if government and private sector can deliberately work together on restoration. So there's many opportunities for public-private participation and collaboration. Also, private sector actors, we looked, inward and agreed that there's need to do cost-benefit analysis of some of the restoration initiatives. I think someone has mentioned earlier about tree planting versus tree growing. So some of these activities that are undertaken need to be followed through to make sure that we have a successful outcome in the end. There's also the need for technical support. So there are many groups, especially SMEs and community groups, that would like to do more, probably plant trees, probably engage in many other restoration activities around water catchment areas, but they lack the technical support, for example, to enable them to know what kind of tree species, for example, would do well in their particular area. So you can find that they end up trying in vain to undertake activities because they don't have the right support to enable them to do a good job at it. So that was a really key one that came out. Also, our colleague has mentioned about county governments. There's need to allocate funds for restoration work. And we really appreciate the fact that there's so much to do for counties and so much in various other sectors of health and pulling up county economies, but also the restoration work and environmental protection work needs not, they should not be left behind. Also, there's need to have private sector actors aligning themselves with the relevant policies. So there's a lot of policies that the government has put out, but we find that in some instances, private sector actors are not able to identify what policies would be able to help them to get on well with undertaking restoration work. There was also another good suggestion about innovative ideas for landscape restoration from the perspective of landowners. So again, we talked about the different types of climates that we have in Kenya, and the landowners also have some really cool ideas that need to be considered. So we need to also move away from the regular same old plant a tree, and just get into more innovative ideas that are profitable for landowners and also end up encouraging them to undertake restoration activities, so that it's not just a thing that's done for for sure, but it's also something that can be useful. For example, planting trees that are beneficial to farmers, like we had a presentation on from one of the state agencies telling us about fruits and nuts. So you can end up having, it can have a positive scale-up ability in the community. So there's also one more that private sector actors need to aim at creating profitable enterprises linked to landscape restoration. So that goes hand in hand with what I've just talked about, but in this case, it's actually private sector undertaking restoration through innovative, profitable enterprises on their own, in addition to the point previous one on landowners doing it on their own as well. Next slide, please. So there's also use of online platforms. So we talked about the need to have platforms where people can come together and encourage one another to share success stories, to share challenges, to just come together and be able to learn from one another, because sometimes we can all be doing little different things and not realizing that there's opportunities and advantages that we can borrow and learn from others as well. So there's also a need to document all these great things that private sector is doing. In fact, the session that we had yesterday was so nice because many people felt that there's so much that is happening that we don't know about. So it's really important that all these success stories are shared, and they also help to encourage others to jump on board and get into undertaking restoration work. Also, we have high unemployment rates in Kenya, especially for the young people, and restoration work provides many opportunities for creating employment. So, there's so many examples like establishment of tree nurseries. There's also some of these Kazi kwa Vijana projects that the government has been undertaking. Most of them involve cleanup, but there's also opportunities to plant trees along forests and roadsides and public spaces. So there's a lot of opportunities. We just need to be more creative about how we can bring in the youth to help in restoration work, and at the same time have an opportunity to earn an income as well. Of course, community involvement is so important because if private sector and government are undertaking all these things on the side without having the community on board, then you can have challenges. For example, communities that live around forests tend to feel that they're isolated in forest restoration activities, and so they don't really view the forest as part of something that belongs to us, or wetlands or riverine ecosystems, because we come in from private sector or government comes in, a group undertakes a cleanup or plants trees, and the community is just watching. So having them involved is better for the long term and ensures successful restoration of these ecosystems that we've been talking about. Also, it's good to create one entity for all bodies interested in investing in restoration. So there's this huge pool where we can all have access to, to funding, to opportunities, to technical know-how, and all this is domiciled in one place so that you can log into that space or access that space and be able to get whatever kind of assistance that you require in restoration activities. So that was really a good recommendation that came out from the session. Next slide, please. So on way forward, so the World Agroforestry, which is ICRAF, and all stakeholders involved in the conference have agreed that there's need to carry this discussion forward and to continue to liaise with the KEPSA, which is the apex body of the private sector, and has so many actors involved in it, together with NGOs, international organizations, to partner together to be able to continue from all the information that we have shared in the last few days on the conference, so that this doesn't end here. We don't all go back to our little spaces and continue doing our little things, but let us bring our hands together and build on the synergies that we have developed during this conference. And also all the recommendations, the challenges, the bottlenecks, the action plans. There are so many, as you've seen in the presentations that have come before mine, that there's so much that we can do. And so we need to, to have this put together so that they can be addressed on the one platform that we hope will continue to carry this discussion forward. So I think that's it for my presentation. I hope I've not been too fast, and I hope that it's been clear. So thank you so much, Mika. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Linda. And what an incredible update of the different thematic sessions. As you'll agree, I'm sure, very, very rich content, lots of actions going forward, and very exciting. So I'd just like to thank all of the themes for the update. I think now people have a good understanding of where we are, what's come out of the conference. And just before I hand back over to Lucy, I would just like to launch a quick poll. It should be on the screen about how you feel. So you can have multiple selections, but are you excited about the opportunity ahead? Do you feel that there's a clear action plans, or you're not quite clear yet on the way forward? So I've just put that up on the screen. You'll see a poll there. And while we're just waiting for some feedback, and as I hand back over to Lucy, I just want to say thank you to those that have presented. Now we're going to hand over to hearing back from many eminent speakers. And I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of the CAS for the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives. We're very grateful for the speakers that are coming next. We've got 58% of the vote, so I'm going to stop in 3 seconds and sharing the result on the screen. As you can see, there's a lot of excitement and people feel on the whole that there is a strong way forward. So thank you so much. Back over to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Miki. Thank you so much. I'll seek that I'll drop my video because I have very weak network from where I'm working from, but nevertheless, we are together. Having said that, before I call in our next speaker, who is our very able Dr. Garite, I must recommend and say thank you very much, Miki, for that well-guided session of the thematic teams and leads, for all the well-articulated summaries, recommendations, and actions. We can only look forward to those actions coming into implementation stage and really restoring our ecosystem. This conference has picked a number of challenges along the way. Those challenges, we can only just flip them over because significant number of solutions are here with us. I'm very excited. I think maybe I'm one of those people who voted the excitement, because when I look at the panel throughout the few days we've been here, the resources background in terms of donors and partners, the policy guidance that already one of, I think, leader was alluding to, the coordination through the teams that have coordinated this platform, the expertise from academia and research, the county participation, grassroots, where the action is, that engagement and the partnership opportunities that the youth is seeking for. All that is needed to be, we just flip aside, partner, and keep this fire going. So I already have another clarion call on top of the one I gave earlier, that as a community, we need now to eyes up this with passion. And then I'm sure we'll proceed. So with that, I'm honored to invite one very able colleague who will give us a reflection on the conference and the opportunities, flipping out all what we have to opportunities that will help us achieve what we set out for this conference. So Dr. Garite, sir, take it on.
Thank you, Lucy, and good morning, friends. Wow, what a week. You know, when we first began many months ago to work on the idea of convening a national conference like this, I had no idea how successful this thing would prove to be. Many of the members of the organizing committee would probably agree with me that what has transpired this week was far beyond our wildest dreams. And this is fundamentally due to the incredible, amazing work of the members of the organizing committee. Under the leadership of Susan Chamba and Mika Bourne of the Africa Regreening Program, with tremendous contributions from so many members of this diverse committee, and backed up so ably by Zanel Nguru, Marian Aluch, Winnie Achieng, Laura Mukwanda, and Gibson Wagana for the IT support. And we should also not forget the great teams that came together to organize the excellent pre-conference webinar series, plus many others, too numerous to mention at this time. But I dwell on the terrific work that they have done in bringing us together and connecting us with so many inspiring and informative presentations for another reason as well. For I believe that the committee, which worked so hard and so well together, is the key to attaining a successful follow-up to this conference. We have just heard from many recommendations for future action, but what is essential is sustained and generous leadership to keep the pot boiling, to keep us moving forward through the thick and thin of it in the coming weeks and months. Therefore, it is my fervent plea that the organizing committee will continue to be active, meet regularly, and invigorate the recommended actions and continuously monitor their achievement. Please, organizing committee, do not rest on your well-deserved laurels. Gird your loins and get on to the quest to support the implementation of the conference recommendations with vim and vigor, confident that your leadership will continue to be crucial to the success of all aspects of the Kenya restoration movement. Please don't let your foot come off the gas pedal. Rather, press the pedal to the metal and drive us forward. I have no doubt that everyone who has participated in this wonderful conference will agree with me that you should do so. Of course, you will want to further expand and diversify the committee to make its composition even more representative of the stakeholders represented in this conference, and to encourage many others among us to join it. But please, don't be shy to carry on the vision that you have created here and that you have fulfilled here. We desperately need your leadership. The committee can also provide invaluable support to government as it forges ahead with the implementation of the Forest Landscape Restoration Action Plan, the FOLAREP. The flexible, non-governmental nature of the committee can provide such valuable energy to reinforce and add momentum to the government's own efforts, although great leadership is coming from the government itself. Non-government and government, they are two restoration forces that can beautifully complement each other and urge each other forward. Secondly, as you embark on providing continuity to the movement, I urge you to consider formulating the action groups that have been called for in the recommendations that have just been made. Let me highlight a few of them. First, action groups are needed to facilitate the accelerated restoration for each of the distinct types of land that were discussed during the sessions on Monday: pastoral and rangelands, farmlands, forest lands, and conservation areas. There are enormous opportunities to create synergies among the organizations working on restoration among these land types. In hindsight, the conference probably spent too little time deliberating and exchanging experiences about restoration within each of these land types. But we can make up for that by creating these groups and continuing our regular planning and actions within them. We also need action programs on several of the key cross-cutting themes of the conference. First, capacity building. There were strong expressions of support for lots more capacity building across institutions in Kenya. So there is much capacity building groups available to dig our teeth into and collaborate and complement each other, starting with further expansion of the survey tool for the analysis, interpretation, and implementation of the results. Second, a women's network on restoration in Kenya. Wouldn't that be a wonderful, interesting innovation? And third, a youth restoration network also, perhaps even a national youth restoration corps. Fourth, we ought to have a private sector restoration support network as well. And fifth, there was excellent progress in developing a restoration monitoring collaborative effort with quite detailed plans that laid out in the monitoring recommendations. There's a blueprint. Now there is need for leadership to take this forward vigorously. So, do celebrate the great work that you've done to bring together so many amazing people and their organizations to share their rich experiences in restoration and to make recommendations that take restoration in Kenya to a whole new level and to be a model for Africa and the world. After the celebration is over, remember, it's now pedal to the metal, folks. Let's get to work. Onwards. Thanks.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Galite. It cannot be better said than that. I think the energy is there. And the clarion call for Dr. Galite cannot go unnoted, that we need to head there straight on and pick the action groups against all the thematic areas, the network strengthened and working. And if anything, I think I really recommend the calls against, if it's the youth, have their call again and tighten up the issues they want. The church, the faith-based organization, on and on. And thank you very much. That's very clear. We have the energy now to proceed, and I thank you so much. We are now going to the next session for Q&A. Mickey, I don't know how you want us to proceed. I see a number of questions in our Q&A. We could have a few here.
Yes. We have a few questions coming up in the Q&A.
Yes,
I would actually like to ask.
Come again?
I would actually like to ask Susan Chomba. I think you've been following the chat about where we go next. So Susan, would you just like to ask the question and summarize what you're seeing in the chat around where we go next with this momentum?
Okay, Susan.
Hello, everyone, and what a pleasure. I will not take so much time, but I think the key question we are asking is how do we really then get, that what Dennis has challenged us, sprouting leadership for each of the sessions, and as Dr. Lucy Ng'ang'a has mentioned, to really get the work on the ground. I think the CS mentioned that he's very interested in visiting and spotlighting and encouraging successful restorations across the country. He challenged us to come up with at least 3 cases where he could visit and showcase and discuss about successful restoration on the ground. So if you have successful cases that you'd like us to organize visits in different counties with the CS Tobiko, and I'm sure other CAS is also here, and other senior government officials, we would love to hear from you. Just get in touch with the Regreening Africa team. And I think the next thing we should be thinking about is how to have this maybe as an annual event with the different teams that Dennis has challenged us to form. Women in Restoration in Kenya, I'd love to be part of that, and really have an event where we are showcasing and inviting people in the field to see what is happening. So I think, Mika, that's just what I'd love to add, but I love the pedal to the metal and really accelerating the restoration movement in Kenya.
Okay, Mickey.
Thank you so much, Susan. And to be honest, I think a lot of what is in the chat is around that discussion around where do we go next. And so I think a lot of that conversation can continue. But I wonder, Dr. Lucy, if we want to have any discussion around, I saw a few comments around how we really recognize what is happening at the community level. So I saw a question earlier by Edmund Barrow around an emphasis of there are a number of community projects that are happening without projects, and how do we really bring up and emphasize on them? So I wonder if any of our panelists would like to comment on that, particularly from the leveraging and movement building session.
Sure. If anyone can give us some, highlights and way forward on that, so that our participant also gets to see how they can plug into either ongoing or new initiatives from this platform, that would be great. Anyone out there who would want to chip in?
Can I suggest, Laura, if you can respond on behalf of the leveraging and movement building thematic session?
Yes, Mika. So the question was how we can recognize community initiatives, or maybe what's already being done on the ground by communities, but not necessarily in projects, right?
Yes, and how can we learn from those?
Well, okay, thanks a lot for the question. First of all, I think the best way would be one recommendation is working to document such kind of initiatives so that we can improve their visibility, like using, encouraging some of these groups also to use social media so that they can, not really groups, or okay, I think that builds more into groups, but now documenting these stories and highlighting them. I think that's the best way forward.
Okay, I think, yeah, and I think the issue of at the community level, there is a lot that needs to be brought out, so that even entities that would want to partner with communities, some need also to understand what is happening. So I think the aspect of bringing out the networks, maybe once in a while here and there, having a documentary that brings out what are small communities down where they are doing the success story, and that can be amplified. And not just by action, but even also by support and also duplication. So if there's no other question, I guess we could proceed, Miki.
I think we need to proceed due to time. Thank you,
Sure.
Dr. Lucy.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for all those who have contributed so far. We are now going to, with that energy from Dennis, we are now going to look at and reflect on the conference outcome and what can be taken forward. And I think it speaks to the same theme of things that we are articulating here. And I'll be calling upon speakers to give feedback and opportunities. Those are from the donor community and development partners. And I'll start with Ms. Mayor Bernardi. I hope I pronounced it well. The head of
That's fine.
oh dear, yeah, and delegation of the European Union to Kenya. Madam, please.
Thanks very much, and good morning, everybody. Firstly, to recognize the presence of CAS Anyaga, PS Boga, and PS Kipto, as well as their colleagues from the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Agriculture. And then the representatives of the UN, WRI, KEPSA, development partners, youth representatives, academia, and the Kenya Interfaith Committee on Environment, and anyone else I may have forgotten. It's great to have such a wide group of participants, even on the last day of a week-long conference. Thanks especially, of course, to ICRAF for organizing this conference, looking at the restoration efforts across rangelands, forest landscapes, and agricultural landscapes. I've been asked to speak for less than 5 minutes and to reflect on the conference outcomes and what can be taken forward to action. So first, I'm going to comment on my sort of key takeaways from what we've been listening to. I was delighted to see the importance of county spatial planning, of planning for green spaces, and also planning for land ownership by women and youth. The EU is actually the biggest funder in the land sector, with a big program with FAO, Ministry of Lands, and the National Lands Commission. And we really see this as a transformative sector. And there's great progress being made in Kenya, but there's even more that needs to be made. So we're even doing a phase 2, but I really think the land and spatial planning part is really important. And I was glad to see it raised by several of the working groups. Secondly, I think the really big lesson that came across is the importance of conservation networks, faith communities, and the meaningful engagement of youth and of women. This conference is funded under the Regreening Africa program with ICRAF and World Vision Kenya, and they plan to support some of the proposed actions. But the EU also funds other, I think, innovative community-based organizations such as the Northern Rangelands Trust, of various consortia of NGOs building resilience, especially in the Assals. And we see huge innovations coming out of good community organization and building on community networks to achieve restoration outcomes. So again, this was a great finding of this conference. Continuing with the theme of women and youth, I also noted the importance of having access to finance and to business skills. Again, the EU is funding this under the AgriBiz program, which has 8 business incubation hubs around Kenya. And you can look up the AgriBiz application website because there'll be some calls later in the year if there are individual women or youth entrepreneurs or groups of women and youth entrepreneurs. And this links, of course, to the last comment by the speaker. And I think the next, after our session, there'll also be Kepsa speaking about the links and engagement with the private sector, which I think will also be a very key part. All of us in the development world are learning that we can't do everything or fund everything alone from the public sector. And you really need the buy-in and commitment of the private sector as well, which means better public-private dialogue and so on. So to conclude, I think we can see the need for movement building from the local level and the devolved level, so county government level, involving much greater participation and meaningful participation. And in parallel, we need, of course, the role of central coordination, upscaling, and monitoring. Dr. Dennis Garrity called it sustained and generous leadership, which I thought was quite a nice term. But I think, and I mean, we also heard the example that Kefri said, there's a need to harmonize the processes for monitoring restoration projects and harmonize the apps, for example. So I think the proposal of forming a technical working group for restoration monitoring sounds like a very interesting outcome of this conference, especially as it seems to be time bound. I noticed they planned to complete work by May 2022. And it would be really important from a development partner perspective that we can see how the different levels of engagement and financial contributions and partnerships that we're contributing to, how they're all going into the bigger picture and how we can monitor at global level what we're contributing to. So I think that's a very nice idea, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the conference whether that will be accepted or how the actions will be committed to. That's everything from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That is very well put. EU has a very strong presence in Kenya across sectors and across initiatives. And to have EU continue partnering in large-scale restoration is most welcome. Thank you very much. So we go on, and I want to call upon Anne Angwenyi, Climate and Environment Advisor, British High Commission in Nairobi. Madam, welcome.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I want to recognize the presence of various colleagues here, the representative of the European Union and the UN, KEPSA, ICRAF, and the youth organizations and interfaith-based organizations in the private sector. Importantly, I'd also like to recognize the presence of government representatives, the cabinet, the CAS, who is on the line, PS's Office, Ministry of Environment, and officers from the government. Before I mention everybody, I would like to just say all protocol is observed. I am aware that we have different representatives here that I may not have mentioned, but I do take cognizance of the fact that we have close to 220 people represented in this meeting, which is indeed really, really, really encouraging to see. I also recognize and thank the organizing committee of ICRAF. This is an extremely important event, and it's seen especially by representation. And I would say that everybody having 1 week and having all this participation is a clear sign that what you have set forward is extremely important. I want to take the opportunity that you have given me to highlight the fact that we are at a turning point when it comes to climate change and nature. As we're all aware, climate change and biodiversity loss are inseparable, requiring global action to tackle this issue. We need to work together. As the UK government, we want to work with not only international partners, but governments as well to drive action in a way that we can use land and oceans and put nature on a path to recovery by 2020. As you're all well aware, the UK will be hosting COP26 this year. And we're also looking forward to the outcomes of the CBD COP later on this year. COP26 highlights nature-based solutions as critical to achieving action on climate change. We are all aware that nature-based solutions could deliver up to 1/3 of global mitigation that is required by 2030, but this only benefits from 3% of international climate finance. And we must increase both public and private investments into nature and nature-based solutions so that we can meet the Paris goals, tackle biodiversity loss, and improve livelihoods. We should also go further and consider the role that nature and nature-based solutions can play in raising mitigation ambition in national determined contributions as part of a comprehensive economy-wide approach. We must also promote sustainable and climate resilient practices that regenerate ecosystems instead of destroying them. As we're well aware, Kenya has set forward an ambitious revised NDC, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation. In addition, the 10% constitutional requirement for tree cover is something that will be critical to meet and in fact exceed by 2030. So it is important that the work of this conference builds up to helping the country achieve this. When I joined, I heard the need to actually develop an integrated monitoring and reporting framework to monitor the forest cover as it is and as we move into the future. This is an important contribution to ensuring that the carbon sink that we have in Kenya is built up and scaled out. In addition, we're all aware that landscape restoration as a nature-based solution is a key tool for Kenya. Therefore, the outcomes of this conference, I hope, will be fed into the work that the government is doing and other key partners are playing. As development partners, we are well aware that finance needs to be scaled up to meet Kenya's implementation challenges. As my colleague from the EU highlighted, they do have various projects that they are working on. The UK will build on the foundations that have been laid out by the 2019 UN Climate Action Summit, and we're working with governments, business, and civic organizations to raise ambition on scaling up nature-based solutions and tackling key drivers of nature loss and degradation, while mobilizing financial resources and the political will to underpin this. I was extremely confident that the outcomes that came out of this meeting with regards to movement building, we're very well aware that Kenya and Kenyans have been extremely active on environmental movements and are now involving the counties. And we all know that counties, it is imperative that county government is included in this discussion. Youth, women, and faith-based organizations are also equally important to include. Private sector, it's very encouraging to see that private sector is now mobilizing and entering the game. Business models that support commercial and sustainable forestry action are important to drive. And it is important to see that they're actively participating, not only through webinars, but also through actual activities on the ground. So this webinar and the discussions are extremely important, as I mentioned. And as Dr. Garrity said, it is now time to put it's now time to accelerate action and move forward. In terms of the work that the UK government has been supporting, we are driving action on 3 critical areas, as we call them, the 3 Ds. The first is on data. We are helping KFS to monitor tree cover through the Forest 2020 program, and this has been piloted in Kwale. In addition, demonstration is our second D. County level landscape restoration action is something that we are looking to support. And lastly, on de-risking, investment-ready business models for smallholder farmers through the Partnership for Forest Action is something that we are also looking into supporting. Colleagues, I know my time is up, but I would like to just say once again that the UK government in Kenya is key to see the outcomes of this conference, and we're looking forward to seeing how best that we can support you. And let me just end by congratulating the conference organizers once again and all the participants, and looking forward to seeing your recommendations as well, and to see how best we as development partners can plug in and support not just with finance, but also technical expertise. But we are well aware that Kenya does have the relevant skills and expertise to move this action forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. It couldn't have been better said. Thank you for really putting emphasis to that we need to increase investment in nature-based solutions. This is in pursuance to restoring degraded lands, of course, loss of biodiversity, and more significantly, building resilience towards the impact of climate change. So it can't be better said, and thank you very much for putting it that and giving the commitment that the UK government is looking forward to the outcomes, and I guess together we'll partner and take it to where Dennis has put us to go. So allow me therefore to wrap this brief session on this agenda on development partners. To wrap it up, allow me to welcome Almin from the Program Director, Cluster Agriculture and Rural Development from GIZ. Please welcome.
Good morning, colleagues. First of all, let me recognize the presence of CS Nyaga and PS Boga from the Ministry of Agriculture, and also the PS from the Ministry of the Environment. I think bringing together over 200 people for a week-long webinar is these days really already an accomplishment. And therefore, I think when I look at the conference objectives, the first one was to catalyze a national restoration movement. I think I can only congratulate the organizers. This has clearly been achieved. As the third speaker, I don't want to repeat what my colleagues Myra and Anne already have said. I can't agree more. Landscape restoration is a territorial, a place-based approach. But landscapes are not empty spaces. There are people living in, and their interests and their livelihoods need to be taken into account. What does that mean? Partnerships between public, private, civil society are extremely necessary to have everybody on board. This has been highlighted by various presenters this morning. And I think this is of utmost importance to have really an inclusive approach. All groups must be on board, otherwise it won't work. The benefits need to be shared. I mean, landscape restoration cannot exclude people. So those who live there need to have a benefit from that. And I think there we from the donor community can really play a role in looking at the projects we are funding, we are implementing. How can this be done? I'd like to use two small examples of German Development Corporation where I think we are trying to do that. One is in Western Kenya, where we have an activity which until now has rehabilitated more than 40,000 hectares of agricultural land, degraded soils, which can be better utilized now, where improved practices, agroecological practices are implemented. And we see that people have a benefit from that simply by a better productivity, but on the other side are also more resilient towards the effects of climate change. So I think this is an example for agricultural landscapes. And soon there will be a follow-up project by German Financial Corporation to upscale this, to introduce, or to not to introduce, but to scale up agroecological principles and agroforestry. Another example I'd like to mention is the Intersectoral Forum on Agrobiodiversity and Agroecology. I think a lot has been discussed about partnerships and how to bring all the different stakeholders together. This could serve also as an example of trying to have those people around the table discuss and agree on actions. I think webinars like this, as Anne said it, are very important for exchange of experiences, for discussing good practices, and but what is then necessary is the concrete action on the ground. That is what we have to do after conferences which end on a Friday. I usually say there's a Monday morning. What do we do on that Monday morning? That's when it really comes into action. And I wish all of us that we take all these activities which we have discussed during that week, the good ideas which were brought on the table, that this can then also be translated into practice. And so with this, I really want to congratulate the organizers for having brought together such a wide range of stakeholders, eminent speakers, and I'm very much looking forward for the documentation of the conference. And yeah, let's look at Monday morning and do the concrete actions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Almin. And I guess everybody notices the same call that is coming, that we need to translate the good ideas to practice. We can't go any other way. Thank you very much. Allow me, because of time, to proceed to the next segment, where I'm calling on the private sector to bring in on how the private sector can support the landscape restoration. We had a speaker earlier in the thematic segment where this matter was really well articulated. And please, John Wandaka, Vice Chair of the Environment, Water and Natural Resource Sector Board, KEPSA, please take it on.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Rusinganga. I'm John Wandaka, the Vice Chair of KEPSA Environment, Water and Resource Sector Board, and also a lead member of EIK. Allow me to make some remarks on behalf of the KEPSA Environment Sector Board. Our development partners, private sector members, ladies and gentlemen, or protocols observed, good morning. I thank you for finding time to engage today in the session on entrepreneurship and business approach to restoration and how we can team up together in the spirit of leaving nobody behind to ensure landscape restoration. This conversion comes at an opportune time as part of the Green Recovery Solutions Worldwide. We thank our partner, World Agroforestry, for providing an exclusive session and partnering with the KEPSA and her members in organizing this very insightful session today in the conference that has been running for a few days. Nature and ecosystem services are critical for private sector members and business sustainability. The water and land ecosystems actually do provide precious services to business, including raw materials, climate, air quality, habitat for species, aesthetic value, and inspiration. The long-term survival of businesses is actually dependent on healthy ecosystems, appropriate restoration of the ecosystems, restoration, vital best practices. Some of the vital best practices we view as KEPSA is one, reseeding appropriate species, especially with the native species. We had in the session yesterday, Kenya is endowed with about 6,000 plant species. Secondly, reintroduction and protection of eradicated flora and fauna. Thirdly, tree planting and preservation of natural habitats for species survival. And number 4, restoration of shrublands, grasslands, and savannas in partnership with stakeholders. For example, those with ownership and user rights. And fifthly, sustainable utilization of resources such as water and wood, wildlife, minerals, or non-timber forest products. Last but not least, the aspect of strengthening governance systems such as secure tenure and participatory large rate management, among others. The sustainable use of natural resources is also very critical as preventive measure to ensure production and consumption that is devoid of pollution. And on top of that, environmental degradation is paramount for a sustainable world environment, the prevention of pollution and ensuring abatement of environmental degradation. In this UN decade of restoration, therefore, private sector has a critical role to play. Firstly, as innovators. Secondly, as financiers. Thirdly, as implementers, because private sector is also beneficiaries of landscape restoration. Reducing our carbon and material footprint is also a key strategy for green recovery and for building back better. The strategy on implementation of climate actions and the race towards achieving a 10% tree cover are key priority actions that we all have to work together to deliver in the spirit of leaving nobody behind. Previous speakers have actually underscored the importance of working together so that we can be able to achieve this very noble objective. The distinct business cases as shared by the private sector during this conference is a true reflection of the critical contribution required from the private sector in this decade of ecosystem and landscape restoration. From the proceedings and the recommendations we had in the morning as we started this forum, it is very clear that the private sector is a significant contributor in reversing environmental degradation and also realization of environmental sustainability, both as financiers and actual implementers. Session chair, I was impressed to hear what Jonathan had to say right at the opening of this session today about the 4 themes about forest landscapes, agricultural landscape, rangelands, and conservation. The various panelists who even briefed us on the recommendation from previous sessions underscored what has been done and the way forward in the action plans by all actors from government, private sector, development partners, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, youth and women, in the spirit of leaving nobody behind. I also want to take note of what Dr. Garrity and Myra and Anne when chaired this forum in the form of forming working technical groups to carry on the implementation of the work that have already been started. On behalf of KEPSA, Environmental and Sector Board, and on my behalf as an environmental practitioner, I want to thank all of you for your participation and commitment toward this noble objective, and look forward to accelerated action by the private sector and our partners. I also want to acknowledge the very good presentation by panelists. I also want to acknowledge the presentation by government and all stakeholders and their commitment in realizing the goal of landscape restoration for a sustainable future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Over to you again, Dr. Ng'ang'a. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, John. And thank you for bringing up the KEPSAs and the business community acknowledgement that the acknowledgement of the importance environment plays in the business sector and how it needs to be very stable, sustainably utilized for businesses to thrive also sustainably. Thank you very much for that. We look forward to all the entities now coming together and getting to the commitments and putting this into practice together. Around me then, ladies and gentlemen, to invite Revis Kavangi, the Africa Coordinator, Ecosystem and Biodiversity Program, and Africa Focal Point for the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. It can be a better ring to have him come and give us the link and how this moves on, because this decade is a decade that we must achieve what we want to do. And after the decade is over, my desire, and I guess everybody's desire, is that we shall move over to something else, having restored our ecosystem. So, Levis.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon for those who are in other time zones. I recognize the presence of senior government officials, the CS Environment, Agriculture, EU, UK representatives, and other representatives of other organizations. Thank you very much for inviting us to the closing part of this meeting. I've listened in since we started today, and I've seen the action items that have been developed through the various thematic areas. And it is very encouraging because the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is running from 2021 to 2030, actually recognizes that no one individual organization nor any one restoration initiative will achieve the decade's goal. We need to work together in concert. We need to work together from different sectors and build the momentum towards an appreciable level of ecosystem restoration. The UN Decade was addressed during the opening of this workshop, so I will not dwell on that. But I just wanted to introduce an element of the UN Decade, particularly in the African context. As we were developing the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration for consideration by the UN General Assembly, the African countries actually met together and they decided to develop a framework for implementing the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And this is the Pan-African Action Agenda on Ecosystem Restoration. The Pan-African Action Agenda has certain salient elements. One is to recognize that restoration is already ongoing and therefore to build on the initiatives that are already ongoing. For example, the AFR 100, the Restoration Initiative, the Terra Africa program, the greening programs that are undertaken by different organizations. And secondly, it's the Pan-African Action Agenda seeks to encourage an all-sector approach. And I'm glad that in this meeting, there are representatives from faith-based organizations, from the private sector, from civil society, from development partners, from all sectors, agriculture, environment. I've seen a good diversity of participants in this meeting. So it's a plus to what we are aiming to do in terms of implementing the UN Decade, and for Africa to implement the UN Decade through the Pan-African Action Agenda on Ecosystem Restoration, which Kenya being one of the countries that was at the forefront in developing this framework. In terms of what I can give as our take homes, one is that restoration has been ongoing, and therefore we need also to look at the quality of restoration. And I can, throughout the presentation, I've seen that nuance that we need to move away from tree planting. I've seen it also in the chart, and go to tree growing. This gives us an element of improving the quality of restoration. And we also need to look at moving away from tree planting per se to looking at what is suitable for different ecosystems, for different landscapes. What are the species that are suitable for using in the restoration? One of the issues which I haven't noticed, maybe it was discussed, but it wasn't captured in the notes, is the issue of food systems. And food systems is becoming an important element. Of course, it's related to other aspects that have been discussed, but just having an integrated approach to food systems is something that would be also of importance going forward. An example, what we are doing in Kenya is looking at the economics of ecosystem services through agrobiodiversity approach. And we are engaging with the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Agriculture as the lead, with the National Museum of Kenya as an executing agency. Now, as I mentioned, National Museums of Kenya, we need also to take cognizance of the intangible aspects of restoration. Faith-based organizations is one approach, but the cultural and religious practices, indigenous practices that support and go towards enhancing restoration or enhancing the functionality, the health and productivity of ecosystems are also important. I think this is an element that we need to take into consideration. And our sister agency, UNESCO, has been undertaking this work in partnership with UNEP to understand the intangible aspect. By the way, in the conference of the parties of the CBD, it has been recognized that one of the aspects that needs to be encouraged is what we call other effective conservation measures. These are measures that are not undertaken in protected areas per se, but they are undertaken voluntarily or through traditional practices or through private sector engagement or through individual practice. And these are also becoming important as we talk about restoration. And there was a question here that how do we get those kind of actions mainstreamed or even made known? So this is an element that we are also trying to encourage during the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration implementation from 2021 to 2023. The private sector plays an important role. And I'm happy the private sector, I've seen Linda, I've seen the chairman of the environment part on this forum. And the private sector, of course, what we have recognized from our experience on restoration, that there is an element that they can do even better from an investment point of view. But for them to engage in investment, there is a barrier that needs to be overcome. How do we overcome this barrier? It's still some work in progress. One of the initiatives we are undertaking is the Seed Capital Assistance Facility, which goes towards using public funding to address or to develop projects to a level where the risks have been addressed, and therefore presenting this set of projects to potential investors, private sector investors, like pension funds, which have a lot of money that can be tied into a restoration for a long time, because you realize restoration is also a long-term commitment. So this is one of the experiments we are undertaking with assistance of the UK government to see, and Kenya is one of the countries participating in that experiment, to see how do we remove the risks that are related to, that keep private investors away from restoration projects. It has worked very well to some extent in regards to renewable energy. But how does it work within the restoration confines? That is a question that we need to do, and maybe going forward through this forum, we could also add to that. Innovations are important, especially when we talk about youth and the ability to come in with solutions, digital solutions. This is an aspect that we could encourage the youth to continue supporting innovation, but the youth are also looking at it from an employment point of view, from livelihoods point of view, from wealth creation point of view. So this is also an important and a takeaway message that I'm going with to see how we can engage with that. In this also, let's also unpack when we talk about youth and women. Sometimes we program the two together and therefore miss the specificities between them. So I'm glad even Dr. Garrity mentioned that we need a network for youth and we need a network for women. So this is something that we could look at as we go forward. And lastly, there was a question and also some discussion in terms of funding. And I just wanted to share with you some developments. Currently, we are discussing or developing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which will replace what we used to call the Aichi targets, the 2020 Aichi targets. Because we have realized after scientific studies and assessment that we couldn't achieve the Aichi targets. So the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is a replacement of the Aichi targets. And one of the issues, which is key, what we are hearing from Africa continent, is the issue of funding. And the issue of funding related to setting aside a specific fund that goes towards conservation, towards restoration, towards aspects of biodiversity management at national level. And the other aspects which you might be hearing very soon is that the African Protected Areas Congress, which is going to be held in 2022 in March in Rwanda, Kigali, is also discussing some aspects about funding and whether it is possible that an African specific trust fund could be set up to support effective management of protected areas. But as I said, there are other effective conservation measures which needs also to be considered as we discuss this. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to take a long time on this. I just want to thank you for this opportunity. Let's pull together. We are focusing on landscapes. Some other people need to focus on marine and coastal areas. Some other people need to look at aquatic ecosystems, as these have been identified as some of the areas that have been left behind. So thank you very much for this, and let's move together. Let's move forward together. I invite you to join the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which UNEP and FAO is providing the coordination and leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Levis. I think we are on board, and thank you for the invite. Thank you for bringing it up that we need to improve the quality of restoration for sure. Tree growing, and I'm an agronomist background, and that's where to go with the trees. Not forgetting the food systems, and of course, embracing the innovations in restoration. Thank you very much. So because of time, allow me, ladies and gentlemen, Wanjira, you stand between us and the closing. So allow me to invite Wanjira Maathai, who is the Vice President and Regional Director for Africa, World Resource Institute, to bring up opportunities and insights for restoration and in creating meaningful movement. Wanjira, please.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you for the pressure. I want to mine will be quite brief actually, so I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear. I want to recognize the presence of any government officials, especially our PSs, PS Kipto. Thank you as always for your support and commitment to this agenda. Governors, the EU, the UK. I want to add my congratulations first to the organizers, stakeholders who've made this session such a success, the success that it has actually been. Well done for such a comprehensive week. And then the constant call to turn up the volume on restoration in Kenya. This is the decade of ecosystem restoration, and it's a great time for us to be in solidarity with the rest of the world. I love that so many of you said we have all the ingredients we need. I did not hear one person say that the bottlenecks and barriers are too hard or too much for us to overcome. It would be crucial for this movement that our ministries and our associated agencies, our county governments, prioritize the creation of the platforms that were mentioned for engaging with you more directly so that these barriers and the bottlenecks can be addressed more swiftly. as was nicely stated, we need that Monday morning agenda, and we need to be able to actually make it happen. My colleague Peter Dunda said something that I think applies across the board in every single discussion we have had. We have the experiences, we have the tools, we have the capacity, we have the partnerships, we have all the skills needed to activate this movement. So as we would say in Kiswahili, shida iko wapi? We have to and we must have a clear roadmap, and we can all support the full commitment so that we can unblock the blockages. I was really happy to hear that there was a session on youth and women's engagement, local leadership by women and youth. Absolutely crucial, but it requires incentives for them to lead. It's not about lip service. It's not about tokenism. We have to mentor these young people. We have to create opportunities and platforms to accelerate and stimulate their entrepreneurship. Technical and financial support that allows them to create successful, strong organizations. We have to help them set up for success. And we know that that's possible if we have the commitment. The 5.1 million hectare commitment is significant, and it aligns well, yes, with our national 10% constitutional mandate. So we are very good at drumming support for restoration, but I know that whenever we are asked how are we doing against that 5.1 million, very few can say much about it. And I couldn't be more delighted to have seen that recommendation for a national restoration monitoring working group. Let's set it up, let's get it happen. We know that what gets measured gets done. And if it's not measured, it will just not be done. So you can count on WRI's support to the AFR 100 agenda as a key technical partner, as well as through the national and subnational platforms. We're in this with you, we're in this to win this. And as Kenyans are recognized globally for our policy and strategies, we really need to demonstrate that the same can be said for implementation of restoration. So we have a great opportunity, and I know that a successful restoration movement has to be rooted in local communities. We know that, we've heard that quite said here quite a bit, but we also want to highlight the fact that this agenda, 5.1 million, I hope in the next few weeks, we will be talking about what each of our 47 counties will contribute to that 5.1 million hectares, and that we will have county level commitments and compacts that are driving this agenda. Finally, I want to just share that overall, we want to shift our energy from a national commitment and target setting phase to that accelerated implementation phase. And that's what we've been hearing a lot today. So in closing, Lucy, I've always been inspired by the restoration movement that was created in the United States during the Great Depression, a time when things were so difficult. Spirits needed to be lifted, youth employment needed to be created, and landscapes needed to be restored. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yes, because we are sort of in the same situation now. The Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s rescued a lost generation of youth and restored millions of hectares of land over 9 years. What a coincidence. It matches exactly what we have. They planted billions of trees, terraced millions of hectares, created windbreaks, soil anchors, restored forests, and even created a very vibrant ski culture that the US is now known for in parts of it, and created as well as a successful network of state parks. It's been done before, and so we can also do it again, right here in Kenya, and inspire a restoration generation. Thank you very much, and congratulations to all of you. This has been amazing to listen to. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, Wajira. I knew you'll not disappoint. Thank you so very much. I know Wajira is a very action-oriented person, and from what she has talked about, it was clear in her submission. Aliuliza shida iko wapi? Na mimi nasema hakuna shida. Tuende kazi. So thank you so very much. I could see the great passion that I alluded for in my opening remarks, that with all this together, just an ounce of passion will go very far. Thank you so much, Wajira, and thank you for that. Now, as we come to this very last segment and very important segment, taking cognizance of the high delegation around me also to take note that our Chief Administrative Secretary for the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives. Madam Annie Nyaga is on the call. PS Boga is on the call. But for now, allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to invite the person representing PS Chris Kipto, the Principal Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Mr. Alfred Gesho. Gesho, please bring it on. And after that, you'll invite the PS Agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. My name is Alfred Gesho, Acting Forest Conservation Secretary. I'm stepping in for the Principal Secretary, Dr. Chris Kipto, who is engaged elsewhere. And with your permission, then I want to share his remarks this morning. The Chief Administrative Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives, the Principal Secretary, State Department for Crop Development and Agricultural Research, representatives from other ministries, departments and agencies, county government representatives, representatives from UN agencies, our distinguished representatives from development partners, private sector partners, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I first want to take this opportunity to congratulate the
Dr. Lucy, do you have a system challenge? I cannot hear Mr. Alfred.
I can't hear him too. Actually, I was writing to say, is everybody else having the same problem?
Yes, it's lost. But
yes, I can hear from my end too.
Okay, so it could be on his side?
Most likely.
Yes, we lost him. Maybe someone can give him a call.
I'm doing that.
And Peterson, did you want to step in any way while we wait for Alfred?
Yeah, if it becomes permanent, I can still have, because I have the same note.
Maybe continue.
Maybe Daktari can tell us.
I think I can't, he's not picking, I don't know. So I think we proceed.
Lucy Peter has the same note, so maybe he continues. I'll try to get out.
Okay, Peterson. Please take it on.
Okay. I think I'll pick the note from where he was picking. I think the Chief Administrative Secretary, Minister of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives, the Principal Secretary, State Department for Crop Development and Agricultural Research, Professor Hamuga, all heads and representatives of MDAs, county government representatives, FAO, ICLAV, EU, WLI participants, private sector representation, ladies and gentlemen. I think I am aware that the National Restoration Conference was opened on Friday 9th with the objective, of course, of bringing together our stakeholders in various sectors to catalyze national movement and achieve landscape restoration ambitions for this country. The focus areas were restoration and needs and opportunities that also have, of course, critical bearings on gender and the youth in terms of inclusivity. The key thing for the conference, of course, besides others, is a shared vision for restoration in this country. We cannot fail to recognize the county government's commitments and the interest in the same agenda. And of course, as we speak today, there is a lot of strengthening by stamping from participation of Makueni, Marsabit, Migori, Elgeyo Marakwet, among other counties. Of course, that gives us a lot of strength moving forward. Of course, we are aware that the government takes a lot of seriousness in terms of global, regional, and sub-regional level commitments. And given the circumstance, the major focus of the ministry in environmental conservation, particular to forest and landscape restoration and management, and of course, taking into account the importance of addressing climate change in terms of adaptation mechanisms and mitigation. The role of public-private partnerships is also an interest that we need to take to the next level. Of course, within the ministry, we have already strategies. One among them, the pursuit of 2 billion trees planting target programs that aims to achieve the figure by 2022. It is a year ahead of us. Of course, under the same, we have the national tree growing campaigns, of course, to sensitize members of the public to also help in upscaling the achievement. We also try to ensure that policies and programs are aligned to achieving the 10% tree cover target, in line with the After 100 commitment, in line with the bond challenge of restoring 5.1 million hectares within other agendas. But the key thing is to also mobilize communities, and of course, suggesting alternative livelihoods in terms of providing options to timber products and activities that adversely affect restoration and conservation efforts. At this time, I also want to appreciate the role of various government MDAs, that is ministries, departments, and authorities, non-government organizations, the private sector, community, the role of research, the players globally, the European Union, the United Nations organizations working on restoration in the country as well. The ministry's commitment to national, regional, and international agreements, e.g. Paris Agreement and the Bonn Charge Commitment, is also anchored in our strategies, programs, and projects that also inform the reporting of our achievements. From our end, we appeal that this conference should provide a platform that will conclusively bring a coordinated attempt of various restoration initiatives by various entities out of the opportunities identified here and also the lessons learned. We also request that the players in this conference that there should be some leverage on existing monitoring platforms and processes to contribute to the national FLR progress reporting. Of course, we don't want whatever other organizations had done to go into waste, but to bring everything on board moving forward. The monitoring and reporting framework must be concluded to enable real-time progress tracking and reporting from all national activities. Of course, the strategies implemented by the Minister of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries, including agroforestry, and climate smart agriculture contributing to increasing tree cover should be linked to the same monitoring framework. The agroforestry strategy, of course, should be launched. This is under the Minister of Agriculture. Maybe the PS, Professor Mboga, may have more on that, because we believe it will go a long way to supplement the synergy between the two ministries as well. Finally, and the most important, there should be, out of the participants of this conference, constantly visiting on the outcomes of this conference, so that our minds are focused within a particular direction at all times. Number two, the recommendations from all stakeholders, and particularly the county governments, where the restoration activities will be undertaken, should also inform our decisions. We know that the county strategies and the integrated development plans should be aligned to the national vision and, of course, to the SDGs in that line. So we recognize that we can only achieve more if they have a positive attitude towards our vision. And finally, the technical working group for the development of the National Restoration Monitoring and Reporting Framework and the roadmap thereon should be launched as soon as we can. I think this is something that both the Minister of Agriculture and Forestry can use to achieve the aspirations of this conference. I know we have both participation from the two ministries and also comprising the private sector, the county governments, and all people who want to achieve what we have discussed within the last 5 or so days. I thank you all. Asanteni sana.
Thank you, Peterson. Thank you for stepping in. I talked to Alfred. There was a challenge with the network where he was, but I guess we have progressed well, and thank you so very much for bringing in the aspiration of the PS, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Dr. Kipto. So that we get to this, I am now very humbled to invite our next speaker, or invite the chief guest. And I would bring to your attention at this point that the county governments were very much engaged, even though they were not able to participate in this closing session, I guess because of the preparation with the devolution conference, but their participation was key. So they are not just being mentioned for the sake of making the ideal conversation, but they were here, they presented what they are what they are implementing, the challenges they are facing, and what they are seeking in the partnership with all the stakeholders. So without much ado, sir, allow me, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, to invite the Principal Secretary, Ministry of State Department of Crop Development and Agricultural Research from the Ministry of Agriculture, Professor Hamadi Boga. Sir, please welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this conference. Sorry, I could not join during the opening session because of conflicting meetings back to back, but I'm aware of what was being discussed, and I really appreciate that all stakeholders have come together to talk about landscapes. I don't have a written speech, but only to appreciate the collaboration we have had with the ICRAF, with Professor Garrity, and all the conversations we've had also with other partners who are acting in this landscape space. I think restoration of landscapes is the most important thing that we could ever do to create a sustainable planet. And I think all of us must do what it takes to make sure that we don't degrade the environment beyond what we have done. Right now, we know the consequences of our actions, and I think everybody does not need to be persuaded or to be convinced. The evidence is very clear. Our lives have changed. Our farming systems have changed and are going to change. And we can only get ourselves out of the hole that we dug over the years. And in the State Department, we know agriculture has a big role to play in landscape restoration, and therefore has in landscape degradation, and therefore must have a big role also to play in restoration of landscapes. And in the ministry, all our strategies are designed to ensure that agriculture practices are sustainable. And we have various initiatives where we're working with different stakeholders to make this happen, including developing the agroforestry strategy with ICRAF and other partners, and also the Save Savo initiative with the Ministry of Environment, where we are thinking about how to restore that, and also some of championed by the SOCNOT project, where we are also keen to participate. But I think this conversation has to go on. We are in the process of preparing a cabinet memorandum around some of these initiatives so that we can get the political buy-in of the whole of government. And of course, we always engage the private sector and civil society and communities and the counties in our efforts, and we'll continue to do so. So without much ado, let me invite the guest of honor, the CAS in charge of crops in the Ministry of Agriculture, Madam Anne Nyaga, to read the close the conference. Thank you very much. Madam Anne Nyaga, over to you.
Thank you, PS. Thank you for your brief remarks and comprehensive ones. Let me first of all start by acknowledging the development partners represented by the chair of the ARD, Madam Myra, representatives from the British Commission and also GIZ, private sector players, ICRAF and the conveners of this conference, the county government representatives, and also that of the national government, and also the restoration stakeholders. Let me first and foremost give the apologies of our cabinet secretary who couldn't be with us here today. And he sends his apologies and also will be making his brief remarks. but also because of the importance of this subject and of this conversation. That's why PS and I are here to be able to see how do we further support these conversations and not only have them as conversations, but see how do we move them into action, because that is where the major impact is when we start implementing the discussions. Before I give the official remarks, let me first and foremost, as I mentioned, just congratulate the conveners of this conference. Bringing on board all the key players, I know is not an easy task, and just reaffirm our commitments towards ensuring that you receive all the support that is needed for us to be able to collectively achieve what we must achieve. Let me also maybe also make an encouragement to the team, even as we set up the coordinating platforms. Let us see exactly how we can be able to leverage on those structures that the government has been forming within the various ministries. Let me, in this case, use the Ministry of Agriculture, where we have over 20 programs that are being implemented over the various state departments. I'll use an example of two programs that are actually three programs that are there in 47 counties, just to mention but a few. And we already have structures built, built up to the ward level. And the county governments have actually been the key implementing partners, where we have in every county, you'll find we've created 600 groups within a specific county, of course, spreading them across the various wards. And I believe these are structures that we can then be able to leverage on to be able to cascade our actions in relation to the climate, because you know how important issues of climate are to our livelihoods and also our very existence. Also, I've had the various speakers mention the issue of forming youth and women networks. I may want also to make an appeal that we become deliberate and also start talking about children. And this is because of the issue of sustainability and also being able to bring them on board when they're early, so that we don't have to struggle with them getting to understand our discussions at adults at a later stage. And we want to encourage the conveners, even as we retreat to draw and start seeing how to start actioning some of these discussions. The ministry is very willing to also collaborate on issues of the reestablishment of restoration activities in all the primary schools in the country and also in the high schools in the country. We recently launched the 4K clubs and also the young farmer clubs. And you know, like primary schools, we have over 31,000 primary schools in the country. And these are structures where we can be deliberate and start anchoring these restoration activities, so that we can be able to also have an impactful and a quicker achievement to what we desire to see. We've had, of course, the structures, the implementation framework having been established, where we have 6 collaborating ministries. And we have the Ministry of Agriculture, of course, chairing this convening, and also the Ministry of Environment is also one of our key ministries that we implement these initiatives with. And mine is really to encourage that we take advantage of these structures to be able to cascade the knowledge of the land restoration, and also be able to use children as a means to also educating their parents and also their communities. Because many a times we've talked about, you know, using the communities, using youth, using women, but we've forgotten that we have children who are in school every day, and we can be deliberate, give them the information and equip them to be able also to be agents of knowledge transfer to their parents, because these children somehow, these children go home at the end of the day. So I think these are structures we can be able to use, and environmental conservation is one of our key pillars in the programming of the young farmers and the 4K clubs. So I think this, from the conveners, this is an area that we can be able to see how we can be able to actualize, because we are moving into the implementation in the end of this month of July. Also, let me just, I can't overemphasize the importance of integrating the ecosystem restoration to that of the food systems for a more sustainable approach. And rest assured that the government, the Ministry of Agriculture, is very committed towards, ensuring that we have a collaborative and a more comprehensive approach so that we can be able to achieve what we really must achieve for the very existence. Maybe also to the to maybe levies. I think I listened to what Levi said, and I want to really encourage that we start cascading some of these learnings to the other African nations, so that we can be able to, see how we can also be able to bring in the children aspect. Even as we talk about youth and women, let us see how we can be able to reach out to also other countries, since you're the one heading the ecosystem restoration initiative. Let's see how we can also be able to, spread some of these structures and see how we can be able to have also our sister countries benefit from that. So allow me to just quickly make, on behalf of our Cabinet Secretary, his brief remarks on the closing of the National Landscape Restoration Scaling Conference. The government of Kenya has made a number of international restoration commitments, including the Bonn Challenge, the New York Declaration of Forests, the Aichi Target 15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, specifically SDG 15, that is Life on Land, which aims to achieve land degradation neutrality by 2030. The African Forest Restoration Initiative, and the SDG 1, 2, 12, 13, 15, 17, amongst others. The national government is committed to ensuring 10% forest cover by 2022, in line with the global commitments. On this commitment, the Ministry of Agriculture is allocated a responsibility of ensuring 10% tree cover on the agricultural landscapes through the promotion of agroforestry alongside other climate smart agriculture interventions. And on this, I can be able to report that we have various programs that have incorporated issues of climate smart agricultural approaches in all the programming, and those ones are actually being implemented as we speak in all the 47 counties. Restoration of these landscapes will contribute to the achievement of Kenya's Big Four agenda that prioritizes food and nutrition security, affordable housing, increasing manufacturing, and affordable healthcare. Degradation is estimated to cost the Kenyan economy at least 3% of her GDP annually from soil and nutrient depletion on cropland. The New York Declaration on Forests, the Aichi 15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically SDG 15 on Life on Land, which aims to achieve land degradation neutrality by 2030. Furthermore, the United Nations has declared 2021 to 2030 a decade of ecosystem restoration. We are therefore delighted to be associated with this initiative, working in the restoration space, into involving various restoration practices suitable for different landscapes. Having identified bottlenecks and opportunities for greater restoration, entrepreneurship, and business, there's therefore need for accelerated restoration momentum towards the achievement of our restoration aspirations and development of a common roadmap pursuant to key actions. Development of a common monitoring, verification, and reporting framework for landscape restoration, and this may provide a platform for learning and engaging with policymakers on the requisite policy adjustments and explore funding mechanisms to support the process towards realizing the vision of the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, that is 2021 to 2030. Kenya has pledged to restore 5.1 million hectares, that is 2.55 million hectares by 2025, of which restoration target for croplands is 2.1 million hectares and 1.9 million hectares rangelands by 2030. Restoration of 5.1 million hectares of the degraded areas in Kenya would be estimated to cost Kenya 1.9 trillion Kenya shillings, with accruing restoration benefits of 7.6 trillion. This therefore implies that the economic benefit of restoring Kenya's forests and landscapes far exceeds the cost of restoration. We are then grateful to development partners whose efforts have led to this journey, specifically Greening Africa, FAO, World Agroforestry Center, International Center for Forestry Research, World Resources Institute, World Vision in Kenya, and a host of other international and national, state and non-state actors organizing this virtual conference on scaling land restoration in Kenya, which has gone an extra mile towards enhancing the conversation of accelerating the momentum of landscape restoration in Kenya by bringing together and linking multiple dimensions and efforts. With those many remarks, I want to declare the workshop, the conference, officially closed. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Mickey, up to you.
No, Lucy, I think we've had it officially declared closed. So Lucy, you can close us out and then we can finish off.
Very well then, thank you very much. The remarks from the CS by CAS, Madam Anne Nyaga, are very well articulated in terms of summing up all what we've been speaking about the entire week. Thank you very much, dignitaries, for crowning our meeting, for all the participants, for the organizers. I can only say we are looking more to this, either by what Dennis said in segments of these different groups, but thank you very much. May God bless every one of us today. Bye-bye.
Asante sana, Dr. Ruse, for well coordinated moderation during the closing.
Thank you.
Lucy, Beck.
Hi, Francis. Thank you so much for all your contributions.
Yeah, it has been great.
Cass, for those closing remarks.
Yes.
Oh, it's over.
Okay. That's been a great week.
Thank you, Lucy.
It has. Thank you, Dr. Lucy. That was amazing moderation. We really appreciate.
Really, thank you very much. Jonathan?
Hi, Lucy.
A long time, how are you?
I'm surviving. It's been a week.
You better, you owe me 3, not 2.
No, it's Peterson who invited you, Lucy. What do you blame me for?
No, I'm not complaining, I'm not blaming, but you owe me 3. Just look for that.